This episode of Around the Layout is powered by Rapido Trains.
Buying Rapido trains will make you happy.
Rapido's going back to the 90s for the return of the Mac. SD70 Macs in both HO and N scale in variations you've never seen before. Whether it's coal or racks, you need a 70 Mac. Check out all of the details at rapidotrains.com. Family owned for 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. When I was trusted with the work of North America's top modelers, I entrusted Model Train Box. Flying halfway around the world to Australia, I needed absolute confidence that those models would arrive safe, and they did. Model Train Box proved that it's secure, durable, and built for modelers who care about every detail. Learn more or order yours today at modeltrainbox.com and transport your models with confidence. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Tonight, we're talking big trains, small space, super detail. And joining me to do that, Cameron Stait. Cameron, great to see you again.
Yeah, hi, Ray. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. Great to see you again. It's hard to believe it's been over a month now since I made that trip over to Australia and got to meet you face to face and hang out with you, not only at the Sydney RPM and not only at the Surf Line, Justin Mitchell's layout, but we also got to hang out together in person, got to go see your layout. We're going to be talking about the Robertson and all of that tonight. And then we got to go to Australian Modeler. There was a couple layouts that we got to go see. We had a great time, and you did a heck of a job as a chauffeur, I must say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Ray. Yeah, when Justin asked me to take you around for the day, I was extremely grateful. So, yeah, I picked you up from where you were staying, and we went to my place, and we had a look at the layout, and you did photos, and you did that live stream of the layout, which was really awesome job. And a lot of my friends and family have seen it, and they were really impressed. So, yeah, that was really cool. And then we went to Australian Modeler and we had a look at Dita's layout. And then I think we had lunch at a pub, didn't we?
We did.
And yeah, it was quite jam-packed in a lot in that day. And then I brought you back to your hotel and Paul was waiting there out the front. And you're off to your next adventure.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, we were jam-packed week, but I'm so glad you were able to participate. And I appreciate the guidance and the tour around because like I said, I don't know where I am. I kind of knew where I was. I definitely didn't know when I was with all the time change and figuring that out. It was great to have people like yourself that were great guides along the way. And we got to see some really great layouts and got to see your layout. And we'll share the link to that live stream in our show notes aroundthelayout.com/237. But tonight we get to learn about Cameron. And we get to learn about the Robertson and the video that we shot. You'll be able to see it, but we want to learn a little bit more. So we're going to get into that. Cameron, I know that you were kind of like a lone wolf before all this, weren't you?
Yeah, that's right, Ray. Yeah, I was just building my layout, in the spare room in the house. And, I had a couple of friends who would occasionally have a look at it, but they weren't really into trains as such. And yeah, I was just sort of plugging away, building the layout, and yeah, I went to exhibitions and that type of thing. But yeah, I didn't really have anyone else sort of to share it with.
When did your model railroading journey actually begin?
I think it was back when I was about maybe 7 or 8 years old, and we used to visit my grandparents on my mum's side, and they had a box of old trains that my uncle used to use, and they were mainly Hornby trains. So there was some passenger cars and some set track, and I think there was like a bridge, like a viaduct, and some platforms and stuff. So I used to set it up on the lounge room floor and run these trains. There wasn't any locomotives, but I'd just run them backwards and forwards on the floor on the track and just make up my own stories and stuff. So that's where it kind of started. But then the next birthday came around and my grandparents actually bought me a small train set, and it was a Markland train set. It was like a German locomotive, a really small black locomotive, and it came with a track which was had a ballast profile. It was all metal, and it had like a center pickup. So I couldn't really run it with any other train. So yeah, I played with that a lot, and I believe I kept it under my bed. So my mum said, I can't remember that, but I kept a sheet over it under the bed on a board. So I ran that thing to death. And then I think it was in the early 80s, I wanted to sort of get into it a bit more. So we had a house that had a large garage. And I said to my dad, oh, what if we build a layout in here? And he said, yeah, okay. So I had like 2 6-foot by 3-foot boards, which I joined together in an L shape. And I used I think at the time it was mainly only set track you could use. So I had a sort of figure 8 kind of shape, and it was up and under type of track arrangement. And I had just like foam tunnels and cutting, and I used to get a couple of maybe they were Lifelike kits, like a general store and some station stuff. And I had British trains, American trains, so I was just running whatever I got for presents or stuff like that.
When you started to develop into a little bit more modeling and starting to build techniques, where were you getting that information from? Where were you learning?
So, yeah, I remember at the time, if I went to a newsagent, I would see this magazine called Model Railroader. And, it was expensive to buy, but if I saved up some pocket money, I would occasionally get an issue. And I was just blown away by these massive layouts. So that's when my, I guess, passion for American railroading began as well, because I still like American railroading for sure. And you never know, one day I might build another American-based layout. But so, yeah, Model Railroader was a big influence on me back then. And I remember my parents used to take me to the local library, for school study and stuff. And I remember I thought, I wonder if they have that magazine here. So I searched for it, and lo and behold, there it was. They had, racks of these magazines. So I'd go in there and borrow like a big, chunk of magazines at a time and just read them cover to cover. So back then it was probably Malcolm Furlow. I remember the stuff that he did with his San Juan Central layout, and John Olson, and I remember the Utah Belt. They were some of the memorable kind of ones I remember. So yeah, and what I did was I'd try and buy some rolling stock that I saw in these magazines, because we didn't really have that much available to buy. So you just sort of got what you could get, I suppose.
Yeah, I understand that being a challenge, and really even a challenge up to today with you folks getting your hands on affordable model railroading, the challenges of getting things, shipped from North America to Australia. Back in that time period, I could just imagine how much more difficult it was. How did you overcome that? Were there shops around that could kind of help you or get what you needed, or was it kind of take what you could get?
Yeah, well, there was the larger kind of department stores, which they would stock, I think, mainly Tyco back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I'd get a few of those type of things, and also some hobby shops carried it, but yeah, it was like a bit hit and miss what you could buy. So yeah, I at that time I had some British stuff as well, and it was a DC layout back then, and I had this big clunky transformer. And yeah, so I would just run, all different types of trains at that time.
At what point did you start to progress a little bit more into something that resembles more of what you're doing today?
Well, with that layout I built, I was probably about around 15 or 16, and I got into cycling, and I thought, I was spending more time on my bike than the layout. So we actually sold the layout, and I didn't remember what actually happened, but my parents said that a guy came on a motorbike and and we cut the layout up and took all the track off. So he had all these panniers on his bike and a box thing, and he bought all the track and all the locos and everything, and just put it in his bike, and off he went. So
The guy on a motorcycle takes
Yeah.
off with your childhood memories. There they
Yeah.
go.
So there it's gone.
On
So
the back
yeah,
of a motorcycle, yeah.
yeah, he took the whole lot, and that was it. So the layout just got cut up, and that was put aside for quite a few years. But then I think it was probably around 1990 or so, and I started getting a couple issues of Model Railroader again, and I had a bit more time to sort of focus on the layout because I'd finished high school. And I decided to build an American layout again, and it was like an N-scale layout because they had some quite good stuff out back then. So I think Cato and micro trains. So I built this 6 foot by 3 foot layout, and I had Santa Fe locomotives in Southern Pacific. I was mad on Southern Pacific. And I remember buying a video on the Donna Pass, and that was really inspirational in terms of, you know, the big freight trains and coal trains that went through there. And I've still got that video, and I think one day I'll try and convert it to a DVD maybe. But yeah, I just watched that thing nonstop. I was fascinated by those trains. And so the layout I built, as I say, yeah, it was 6 foot by 3 foot, and it had like a center ridge running through it. I had all the scenery done, and I had a yard and some industries. And so basically the ridge through the middle was like a scenic divider. And on the other side, I had, you know, your standard sort of coal mine set up, and I had 2 tracks going into that. And then there was a tunnel at one end, and the trains would, you know, go through and disappear to the other side. So I had a bit of a operational thing going. But yeah, I remember going to like a Sydney N-scale club, and they invited me to their big clubhouse. I don't remember how I was invited, but so I took my Southern Pacific, they were SD40s, I think, and a few of my cars, and the guys said, yeah, you can run that train around the layout. So that was really cool. But the first time I'd sort of been to a big layout and ran my trains. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, so then I had that layout for a while, and then I think I got into cars, and so I was still riding my bike a bit, but then I decided to sell that layout as well. And I think I sold it too cheaply at the time.
Now you talk about a guy who can show up on a motorbike. At least it's N scale. Did another guy on a motorbike show up?
No, this time he had a station wagon. And yeah, he just put it straight in the back, everything, all the locos, everything as it was. So yeah, I think it sold it way too cheaply. He got a bargain, that guy.
There you go. Yeah, the guy in the station wagon gets a heck of a deal, and off goes your N scale layout. It's amazing how the hobby will wait for you, right? When you come into it, go out, it's maybe the, you know, seasons of your life, but it always seems to be there waiting for you, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So quite a few years went past, Ray, and I got into collecting die-cast model cars, and I was doing that with my dad for a while, and we got quite a big collection happening, and I've still got a lot of those cars today. And what I did, I still had that modeling bug, right, in me. So occasionally I'd build some kits, like some Formula One cars, some military models. I know I built an F-18 Hornet, and I actually did it on a diorama with a full flight deck crew. And because what inspired me for that was there was an aircraft carrier that came to Sydney, and I went to see it, and it was the USS Carl Vinson, and that was pretty cool. We got on the flight deck and went up on the elevators that they use for the planes. And so, yeah, I wanted to build a model of that. So that was really cool. So I was always like, modeling things and trying to scratch build stuff and painting. So that's where my skills were developing, I guess. And then, so with these cars, I wasn't happy with the die-cast car out of the box. I started, modifying them. So I'd strip the paint back, give the car a full respray, lower the suspension, change the engine, put turbos on it. Yeah, just all this stuff. And I was buying American muscle cars and hot rods. And yeah, that was really fun. So I still was modeling stuff and painting. And again, my skills were progressing back then.
It brings up a great point. It doesn't seem like you always need to develop your skills for model railroading within model railroading. We've heard a lot of people talk about how they paint, like, doing art. They've talked about, portraits and that kind of thing. Then you've got, like you're doing where you're building other models and modifying die-cast cars. It all relates, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, these skills that you learn are transferable really to any hobby. The art of painting and scratch building and modifying things to suit what you're looking at in a photograph or how you want to build something. It's all relatable. And so I'd be building these cars. They were in 1/18th scale, so they were quite a big size car to work on. But yeah, I never got to the point where I wanted to take them to a show to display them, but you never know. One day I might do that. But so yeah, I've got quite a few cars in display cabinets at home still. But yeah, they've taken a back seat. So what happened was, got married and had kids, and then I think it was back in about 2015, and we did an extension on our house, like a first floor addition. And so we gained like 2 extra bedrooms, and we just had a bedroom downstairs that was the smallest one, and we just had stuff stored in there. And that's what got me thinking about, could I build a layout in there perhaps, And that was the impetus to start looking into trains again. So it was probably about, a 20-year gap since I'd thought about trains, but not necessarily thinking about them, but, doing something with them. So, I started looking at, what I could put in there and what trains were around at the time. Because back when I used to model, the Australian models weren't so readily available or as, detailed and as the American ones. So that kind of put me off doing Australian trains back then. But when I started researching, 10 odd years ago, I was just, really impressed with the local manufacturers coming through like illusiuon and SDS, putting out these great models, and also models that were, due to come out in the future. So that was just a matter of time before I, worked out what kind of location and era I wanted to do.
Yeah, let's talk about that planning process. But the first question I got to ask is, when you are putting this addition onto your home, was that on your mind? Like, was this kind of like, if we add on, we could also maybe get back to model railroading? Or was it finally just that the project was done and you went, oh yeah, I could do some model railroading in this newfound space?
Yeah, it didn't occur to me when we first started doing it at all. It was towards the end. So yeah, because my focus was on getting the house finished, because we actually were living in there while it was being renovated. So it was a pretty hectic time that we went through. Yeah, so no, it didn't sort of click until probably the builders were almost finished. And I thought, oh, what about this room, and I started thinking about it then.
Let's talk about this room, the size of the room. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the room is about 11 feet by 10 feet roughly. There's a bit of a section where it steps in slightly. So generally it's that size. So I had a couple of display cabinets in there with cars, and we just had boxes that we stored in there during the construction. So, I thought it's a small bedroom, but, what can I make with this? And I started drawing some track plans, and it wasn't anything to do with Robertson at the beginning. It was more based on, okay, if I choose something in New South Wales, where would it be? And then I was thinking about industrial, and I was drawing up these track plans, how they fit the room. And the first one was like, when you walk in the door on the right-hand side, it was just going to take up that space, and you'd have to sort of climb underneath the layout and up into the middle of it to operate it. And that way I wouldn't have to take the door off the hinges or touch the wardrobe, and you'd have a big space in front. And I thought maybe I could take that to exhibitions because it may be suited for that size. And I thought about, because not far from where I live at Rose Hill, there used to be a branch line that ran through there, industrial, and they had container trains that came from the port at Botany, and they'd store containers there to distribute to other parts. And there was also a Shell refinery where they'd have fuel trains that would load up and head out to other regions of New South Wales. So that was another option I was looking at, and I did quite a few track plans based on that. But then it was more of a switching layout, and at the time I thought, I want to run some through trains as well. So I kind of had a plan where I could bend the rules a bit and have some through traffic. And I bought, fuel train, rolling stock, and other stuff I'd seen, in photographs to do that railway. And I actually started collecting a few locomotives for that. But then I decided I wasn't going to go down that path. And I thought, what about like a branch line in New South Wales and a modern era? And I went down to Robertson a few times. My parents lived there for a few years, not far away in Mossvale. I think you might have visited Mossvale when you were down that area, perhaps, Ray. But so they lived there for a few years, and the Southern Highlands is a nice place to visit any time of the year. There's different markets on and different events, and it's just a nice region. So Robertson was, visited a few times, and, we'd go to the pub or one of the pie shops, and I just liked the community there. And then I saw there's a railway line that went through there, and it connects Mossvale to the coast down near Wollongong in a place called Unanderra. And I thought, maybe that might be something I could model. So that's what got me thinking about that region, and in particular Robertson.
Yeah, what was it about Robertson in particular that really drew you to it and said, this is it? Like, you had that moment that said, I have to model this.
Yeah, I think, Ray, it was the station and, the heritage aspect of that, and actually modeling all the buildings. But then it was interesting because they had a few railway crossings there. So I thought maybe I can model that into it. And I thought about operations and, what trains I could run and how I'd run them. And I watched a lot of stuff on YouTube and looked up photographs and books in your magazines to try and find. But yeah, the internet was really handy for researching. You just type in some searches and it's amazing what you can find. And when I started going to Robertson to do more capturing a feel for the place and photography. So I did a few field trips, and I wanted to photograph scenery, right? So, because as you know, my backdrop is photographic. And what I'd do, I'd stand on the platform, for example, and take a picture and then move about 10 meters along, take another photograph. So I'd have this sort of array of photos that I could, down the track use to blend together for backdrops. And it wasn't just the station. I'd go to some other roads as well and take photos there. And I remember there's a crossing which heads back towards Mossvale. And I remember waiting for all the cars to pass. And then I'd stand in the middle of the road and just checking behind me if there's no trucks coming or whatever, and just taking photos of the road going back, in the horizon. So, and that's what I'm using for my photographs. So, and the backdrop. So yeah, it's interesting what you do to, help you to build your layout.
And this was all during the research process that you were taking these photographs?
Yeah, that's right. Once I decided on that I was doing Robertson, that's really where it hit home. So other places that I couldn't take photos of or I couldn't get access to, I would sort of go along in a street on Google Street View. And so I'd use that and I'd capture images in the same kind of format. I'd use the arrow to move up and down the road and take sort of screenshots of the landscape, so I could also stitch them together. So it wasn't all photos that I took myself. I used some Google imagery. And I used a program called Near Maps, which is pretty much similar to Google Earth, but it's updated and you can go back in time and look at different, years. And what I did was you can also measure, it has a measuring tool on that program. So I'd actually physically measure on plan the distance between buildings of the station, the platform length, how far it was between the tracks, how far it was to the next building, how big the houses were in the building. So yeah, I used that tool as measurements to build my buildings.
Yeah, very cool. The ability for us to go use the internet and all the resources that are available to us as we start to research it out. What other research were you doing about Robertson? How did you get to know this area that you were going to model?
Yeah, so as I say, we'd visit there, occasionally, and just capturing the feel of the place, because they often have a lot of mist because it's high up on the plateau before the landform descends down to the coast. They have a lot of variable weather, and they often have like a mist, and they call it the highland mist. So oftentimes Robertson's just shrouded in a cloud of misty fog. So I did go down there once and it was like that, but I had to wait for the fog to pass away so I could take photos. But yeah, it's a pretty unique place, and the climate is quite unique because it's up on the escarpment, which is about 700 meters above sea level, but it's in a fairly short distance. And so, yeah, that's why they have quite unique weather. But yeah, so I just enjoyed the quiet sort of rural setting of Robertson, and the fact that these big trains would also, traverse through there. That's what sort of, was appealing to me.
So with all that research and all the things that you learned, what were the things that you absolutely had to have to model Robertson?
Yeah, so as we all know, we have to use some selective compression in building layouts, and I chose a section of about 1.5 kilometers long, but I had to compress it, so I've probably compressed it by half. But what I sort of wanted to get in accurate scale was the station and the fettler's shed, which I showed you, which is just close by. That section through there I needed to get pretty much 100% in order to make it look authentic to me. There's also a park a bit further beyond that towards a level crossing. I had to condense that by 50%. And then from there to the cheese factory buildings, which were on the video you did, I had to condense that by a lot. So it's probably only a quarter of that length. But yeah, I wanted to capture those buildings that were important. And as I say, the cheese factory buildings were going to be a view block for the trains as they went into staging, because at Robertson there's no tunnels or bridges to kind of conceal a train going into staging. So yeah, that was important for me to have that. And at the other end, there's a level crossing, and I was going to conceal that with, some foliage and trees to conceal the trains going in that end.
Yeah, speaking of all of that and this idea where you have staging and, of course, the idea of running big trains in a small space, talk about the track plan around that train length, about how you were able to incorporate big trains in such a small space.
Yeah, so I incorporated surround staging, and I had seen it before in a couple of articles in Model Railroader, and I thought, yeah, I'll try and do that, because at first I thought maybe I can bring the trains from the layout level down below, like not a helix, but kind of a ramp that would go down below the layout. But by the time it got down, far enough and turned, there wouldn't be enough room to have yard and staging, and then I'd have to build a double sort of gate to get in and out of the door. So it was just going to be too complicated. So I thought, well, if I do surround staging, I can at least have 2 or 3 tracks where I can, stage trains and, bring them out in some kind of arrangement that would suit, the real life timetable. And so the space I had, you have to compromise. So I had to think about, how many tracks and trains I could stage behind, and also have the layout visibly looking okay in terms of the curve radius. Because when you're building a layout, the first things you look at is, the curve radiuses and how, if you've got a peninsula, how much space they're going to take up. So I needed to have enough space for a decent looking radius and also at least 2 tracks to store trains. If I had room slightly bigger, I could have had more staging, so that would have been handy, but I was limited to what I could do. So, it was kind of, a big compromise there.
One of the things that really impressed me when I came to your layout and saw the big trains running was the illusion there that you never saw the train completely. There was always something that kept you from seeing the entire thing on your layout from front to back. And I think that was, to me, what really sold it. Was that an intentional move?
It wasn't intentional because
well, then say it was. Take credit for it. Because it's great,
Yeah.
and it really works. Talk about that.
Yeah, so what I was saying before about the curve radiuses, I had to push everything back as far as I could to get the biggest radius as I could. And that meant the scenery in front of the trains there was a lot more scenery, if you will, between the edge of the layout and the track. And because I was trying to model a prototype, I had to kind of build what was there. So, it was kind of by accident, and also, it wasn't really planned to do that. But it actually breaks the trains up as they pass through, and they do actually look longer than physically seeing it the whole length of a train. So, it was not intentional, but it worked out really well.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really how it is when you see big trains. Unless you're in like this really flat area with no trees and no buildings, or you're way up high looking down, the chances of you seeing a long train in its entirety are slim to none. So it really brings all that realism of rail fanning. And that's probably what really hit me, is it felt like I was rail fanning because you can't see the whole thing at once. You're only getting a window of the train going by, which is to me reality.
Yeah. So there was the way it worked out as well, where I had buildings in between, it sort of formed a view block.
Yeah.
So it gave some composition to, if you just want to photograph a certain section and see the train in a certain form, the view blocks really helped that way. So again, it wasn't really intentional, but I was just modeling, close to the prototype what was there. So it kind of fell into place that way. But it did form some really good view blocks. So you could see part of the train, and then you wouldn't see the rest of it until, you have to move to actually see the front of the train again, for example. Yeah. So the trains I have really were determined in terms of length by the staging. So the longest train I can have is 2 6-axle locomotives and probably about 17 coal cars. And so on a layout of the size I have, it looks good, because if you have a longer train, it's just going to look too long because it's going to snake its way around and sort of, you think it's sort of chasing its tail. So the trains come out and they probably only take up just under half the length of the layout. So it gives you that good impression of a long train, but it's actually probably only really a third of the actual length of the real thing. But it just I was kind of limited, but they're still, decent sized trains, and I can have about 3 trains of that length in staging, and then I've got a shorter track which I use for like a maintenance or ballast train. And I think I mentioned about having heritage trains on the line. So I've got a heritage train which I can store in the shorter loop track in staging for those type of things.
I don't know if we want to call it absolute staging or definitive staging or whatever, but talk about how you did the track plan itself to force trains back into staging so you don't have to throw a turnout to get them to go in. Staging is a part of your continuous running. Talk about that.
Yeah, that's right, Ray. So I didn't want to have, like switching turnouts to bring trains in and out and having to think about that. So I thought, what about using just a crossover that I don't have to touch? And because I didn't want to see trains just going around and around, to me that's not prototypical, and I didn't really appeal to me. But I thought, if I have a crossover, that guarantees trains will go through the crossover and pass through the whole layout and go back over that crossover and return back to staging. So that was something that kind of clicked and made sense to me. So the earlier track plans I did have turnouts to do that, but this was a sort of a real game changer.
Less is more, right? Simple is better, and this is definitely simpler and definitely gives a better illusion because it's not running around the inside or doesn't even have the chance to run around on the inside. It's definitely forced to the outside, so you lose that train for a while before it comes back in.
Yeah, so you can do continuous running if you wish, and I do that quite a lot. If I'm just building the layout or working on something, I'll just have a train running around. But if you're doing operations, then of course you can just bring it out of staging, run through, and back into staging. Yeah, so that was a really good thing that I introduced into the layout.
Let's talk about your super detailing and your scratch building, because I was absolutely blown away. Not only the layout and the design and the fact that it's in a small space, but now with a smaller layout, you've got this amazing opportunity to really drill in on the super detailing, and you have started to really do that. Talk about that becoming your focus.
Yeah, so with the scenery, I'd learnt techniques over time, and I'd sort of practiced similar to what Lance Minheim talks about with some spare pieces of foam. And I would just, paint them and try and work out how am I going to glue scenery material to that and what kind of colors. And so I'd try and find grass, static grass that was resembling the photos that I had. And, sure enough, woodland scenics, for example, they were a pretty good match for the colors I needed. And so what I did in terms of scenery was it's not just one layer of scenery. There's probably about 5 or 6 layers of scenery to get it correct. And so I'd start with the extruded foam base, and I'd fill up gaps with plaster cloth and then sculptor mold and get all of my landforms done. And I just paint that, and I just bought some household paint. A liter of that was enough for the whole layout, and I just put that down, and then I'd come in with glue. So I'd use Mod Podge, and sometimes I'd use a matte medium. And I found that matte medium worked a lot better than the Mod Podge because it's more flexible. And I remember seeing Boomer, shout out to Boomer, because he was an advocate. He's an advocate for this matte medium material. And so what I started looking at was making my own grass mats. And so I'd put the matte medium down, sprinkle a layer of real dirt and some Woodland Scenics fine turf. So I usually use an old kitchen sifter to sift that over and let that dry and shake off the excess. And then I'd come back again with another layer of matte medium with a paintbrush and put on a good layer again. And then I'd hit that with static grass. And I'd do this on a piece of baking paper on an old oven tray, which I taped the paper down to the tray. And what that did was, once that was all dry, I had my own grass mats, which I could cut and peel off and just make shapes to suit what I needed. So that was really handy, where I had the backdrop meeting up with the actual foam or plaster material, because I didn't want to get spray water and all that type of thing onto the photos. And so with the grass mats, I could just cut them and shape them and then glue them straight down, and I didn't have to worry about, getting anything wet. So a lot of the scenery close to the backdrop is done with that way.
Talk about your scratch building. And I know one of the buildings that had to be built and maybe is your signature scene is Robertson Station. Talk about that process.
Yeah, so with the station, I found a kit that resembled it fairly closely, but I had to change the whole roof, and the ends of the building weren't the right profile or angle, so I scratch built those and the roof, and I had to add in some windows and extra doors. So that was a bit of a kit bash. But there's 3 other buildings there at the station, which they were all scratch built. So there's like a signal box and some communications buildings. One of them at the end is a brick building. So I used, sort of brick styrene material to build that. And I tried to match the paint colors, so I'd use photos. And what I did was I used Vallejo paints to mix, and I just get like an old yogurt lid and upside down, and I just mix paints on that with a bit of water until I try to get the right color. Once it's dry, you can sort of tell. So there's a lot of experimentation on getting the paint colors right. Scratch building for me, yeah, it's a lot of fun. You just got raw materials and you start building. So what I did with the houses and the fire station, they were all scratch built. And I think you saw those on the video. One of the cheese factory buildings, I used a technique which Lance Minheim uses, where he uses a photograph taken straight, at the building. And once I get it to the right scale, I cut it out and I would glue it on styrene. So yeah, that was a really cool technique to try. And what I also did was I used some 3D styrene to bring some relief to that. So I added downpipes and some window frames to that, so it just brought out the photo a bit. Yeah, and what I did with that also is windows. Some of the windows I cut out, and then I put in some clear styrene and glued the photo on the back side of that, so it gives the impression there's glass on the window, if you know what I mean. Yeah, so that was a cool thing to do.
Yeah, so using a photo and kind of dressing it up with some 3D parts to give it a little bit more pop. So you have that going, and you got that on one side, and then you mentioned the fire station, even a residence. And that was also what I enjoyed, between the firehouse, even the cheese factory, I believe. All of these, I believe, are non-rail served, but you've put a lot of time into building these, and they're actual houses. They're very prototypically aimed, aren't they?
That's right, yeah. So I wanted to try and represent those buildings, accurately. And from the photos I took and street view, yeah, that was really fun. Sometimes the buildings, they get repainted or added on. So I had to kind of pick a time and just model that, because I think that house that I built, the paint colors already changed from when I did the model. Yeah, so, but at the time that was correct. And, there's some embellishment, because you can't see exactly what the house is. You're not going to go into their front yard and start taking photos. So it was all like, yeah, taken from the street. And yeah, the other fire station was pretty much from Google Street View. And I, cut out the signs that, printed on paper and glued them on. And yeah, that was cool. And I actually remember I built that during one time that I had COVID. So I was stuck inside. So yeah, why not build a model?
There you go.
Yeah,
it keeps you busy, keeps your mind off of things, and gets the projects done. And I'm sure it's very enjoyable for you, and very enjoyable when you start to see these buildings looking like the prototype. Talk a little bit about prototype modeling and what you're doing. Do you find that there is a level where it just makes it a little easier when it's prototype versus trying to freelance it out? You've kind of got a roadmap with prototyping. Does that seem like that's the way it is for you?
Yeah, I think definitely, Ray, because as I said, I used a program called Near Maps, where I could actually, in plain view, I could measure the roof size of the building and distances between a building and a road, for example, or a signal box. How far is that from the track? Even the actual crossing signals, how far they are from the track in both dimensions. So using some technology like that was a real bonus. And with the house, for example, from the photos, I could pretty much work out, the height of the building, and yeah, so that's what I use to photograph. So they come in really handy when you're scratch building.
How far do you live from Robertson?
I think it's about an hour and a half drive, maybe a little bit more.
So it's not a ride around the block. It's a bit. Do you find yourself wanting to go do site visits as you're doing your modeling, or are you able to get what you need from the internet, or do you do a combination of the two? How do you work that out to get your prototypical information?
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to go and visit there more often than I do, but with time and everything, it's hard to do that, to justify it. Yeah, the last time I went down there was in February, and I noticed that a lot of the bushes and trees had grown a lot since the photos I based my layout on. So yeah, I see changes down there. Actually seeing a train go through there is a bonus. There is a sort of a train timetable, but it's not that accurate. And funnily enough, the day I went there, I rocked up and went through that gate that you went through as well, in between the buildings, and then there was a crew of workers there, and they were working on the railroad, and I thought, is there any trains coming through? He goes, no, there's nothing today. It's closed. So just my luck, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because when you see maintenance away workers, unfortunately, no offense to anybody here listening that's an MOW worker, but as a rail fan, I really don't want to see an MOW worker on because we know what that means. It means no trains. Yeah.
And when he told me, I just thought, oh damn, because I had a look at the freight timetable for the day, and I planned that maybe I'd see a train, and yeah, but it wasn't to be.
Wasn't for me either. When I was there, Steve Pettit and Paul Cassar both took me out to Robertson before seeing your layout. So it was a real treat. And when I got to your layout, I was like, I have definitely been here before, which was a really cool feeling. And that's always a fun feeling when you go to a layout that's based in a prototype and you can look at it and go, wow, this is it. Like, there's just absolutely no doubt. And it's got to feel good for you, too, that there's that recognition of knowing that you have sold your layout to be that area.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, when you said that, I was like, yeah, really impressed of your opinion. So I was very grateful. Because with my backdrops, I wanted to, because they were close to the track than I wanted them to be, I didn't have much kind of distance to model and portray what I wanted to do. So that's where the photographs really came in handy, because I only had like a couple of inches maximum of scenery before the backdrop. And if I didn't get it just right, it wouldn't have looked right, certainly for me and for visitors. So I'm glad that you liked it, Ray.
And speaking of backdrops, I'd be remiss to not mention this again. And again, you can go see the video, the live stream that we did from Robertson, Cameron's layout, on our website, aroundthelayout.com/237. One of the things that provided this amazing illusion, so behind the layout, you have the backdrop, the farthest backdrop. Then between the backdrop and I'd say the smaller backdrop, or maybe the view block, is where staging is. And then you have the scenes in front of that view block. So when you go in and you look at it, it has this amazing illusion of depth because you see the blue of the backdrop in a distance. Then you see the trees, the photo backdrop, plus the additional trees that you have put in and the buildings. It just gives this amazing 3D illusion. Was that something you planned as well, or just a good, happy accident?
It was a bit of both. So with the foreground backdrop, I had to be careful that when I selected photos, there was no blue sky showing on the photo because it would look just totally wreck the image if there was the backdrop behind had trees with no blue sky in them. So I had to be careful and mindful of what's the backdrop behind going to look like and does it look right. So I also had to make sure that the scale of the backdrop trees in the foreground one were the right sort of depth compared to the ones behind. So I couldn't have kind of bushes that looked close on the further backdrop because it would just wreck that illusion. So I had to be mindful the whole time of selecting photographs that make sense in terms of scale to the backdrop behind. And so I did have a couple of examples where there was some blue sky showing, so I'd have to mix up some acrylic paint and match the foliage, and then I'd fill in these blue sky patches with paint because otherwise it just would have wrecked the whole thing. And then I had to also make the foliage on the backdrop blend. So I didn't use a computer program, but it was just finding the images and group them together. And then where something didn't look maybe that good, where they joined, I'd sort of hide that with, trees and bushes. So I would hide that kind of join. But generally, I tried to keep everything in the same color palette. And I didn't use a photo on a cloudy day and then have one on a bright sunny day because it gave you the wrong, just didn't work. So there's a bit of work in that, to be honest, with the backdrop. And the one in the back, I didn't mention this before, but when I first did the rear backdrop, I used a really pale blue color, which again I just bought from the hardware store, and it was just a bit too dull. And my wife goes, "What if you just add some clouds and stuff?" And I thought, yeah, I might try that, but I wasn't that good in terms of painting clouds. So I thought, what if I just get some darker blue? So I actually took a photo of one of the pictures I had, and I took it to, we have Bunnings as our big hardware store here, and they color matched the blue. So I had this darker blue paint that I wanted to use for the sky, but that would be higher up. And then what I did, I had a small roller and sort of a narrow paintbrush, and then I got out the paint that I had before, which was the light blue. So I had these two sets of paints on the bench, and I started at the top with the darker blue, and I just run the roller across and then introduce the brush, and I just do like long horizontal strokes with the brush. And it kind of blended them both together. So I got this kind of illusion of where it was mainly the older blue, it looked a bit misty, like you get there in Robertson, and then at higher up was that darker blue sky you have. And sometimes where I blended them together, you might get a bit of a paint run on a horizontal stroke. And then when I went over it again with the brush, it kind of looked like I made a mistake, but it actually worked out to actually enhance and give some kind of random cloud effect in the distance. So it was kind of a little happy accident there in a few locations. Yeah, so I think the illusion worked okay. And what I also like is when you look at the layout and you move in front of it from side to side, you'll see the front foreground trees move, in front of the background trees. So you get that illusion of, you're actually moving in scenery. So yeah, that kind of worked out well.
Yeah, it's an amazing illusion. It's got me thinking of how you do it. I know you did the backdrops with a very thin, like PVC type material, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's a 3mm PVC kind of sheet. I think it's used for art and craft kind of uses. And I think it was in about a 1200 millimeters, 1200 by 600 millimeters. That was the sheet size. So I incorporated that into a lot of the layout. I used it for my fascia, my lighting pelmet at the top. I used it for some of the structure, forms for the walls. I used it for some of the roads, footpaths. Yeah, it had a really really a lot of usage, that material. I've still got a little bit left, but yeah, it's just an amazing material to use because the beauty of it was, in terms of doing a fascia, I could just cut it with a blade, on a board, and I didn't have to worry about sawdust or anything like that. So I could do all that in the room and not have to worry about a big cleanup afterwards. So that's what I used for both the backdrops. And because you can bend it, I could bend it so there's no curves. There's curves in the backdrop and no straight angles. Because I think you kind of lose that depth when you have right angles on your backdrop.
Yeah, the nice round curves that you get out of it. And I love the fact that you left the PVC down a little lower. You ran the print a little beyond the edge of the PVC. So in fact, it's a razor thin edge to the top of that backdrop. So you're not seeing a wide gap at the top, or you're not seeing that wide border at the top. It's a nice thin backdrop. If you happen to catch the top edge, it really just goes away.
Yeah. So at the beginning, when I first started doing it, I matched the photo exactly with the board. So there was a bit of a thickness there. But then as I went along, I thought, I want to hide that, exactly what you're saying. So then from then on, I kept, maybe 10 or 20 millimeters above the board with the photo, so you would never see, the thickness of it. Just got to be careful when I lean over that I don't sort of damage it.
Yeah, fold that photo over. But yeah, and it stays up nice and straight. Tell us how you hold the front backdrop up.
Yeah, so it's the same board material, but what I did at the base, I used a small PVC channel. So that was basically, instead of using angled sort of brackets to secure the backdrop, I used this capping bead that we use on eaves here in Australia, but it's basically a plastic channel. And I screwed that directly onto the plywood. And the beauty of that is it also bends to a profile. And when you put the vertical PVC board into that, it stays pretty much 90 degrees. So I could screw straight through the plastic channel into that board, and I had this nice vertical backdrop without having to have angles in the way, because otherwise when you've got track going behind, you've got to notch out maybe the road base so it goes over the angle, if you know what I mean. So yeah, that worked out well, and I don't even know how I worked that out, Ray, to be honest, but it's just one of those things that you find something and it works.
Yeah, it's that engineering that happens on the fly, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I remember when I first started thinking about constructing the layout, and I was going to use a method where you have vertical strip brackets and you have the sort of metal shelving brackets that click in, and then you have, some sort of board on top. So I experimented with that with about a meter of layout in that fashion, but I just found it was a bit limited and it was a bit non-sturdy. So I kind of drifted away from that. I thought, no, I'm not going to do it that way. So as you build an experiment, you work out, along the way, what's the best thing. So I just went back to the good old Elgaard benchwork. And I actually remember watching some stuff on Model Railroader, and they were building a couple of layouts there, and I've seen it in magazines as well. So I just adopted that tried and true, Elgaard benchwork. And I have, so my layout's got two structures, if you will. There's the Elgaard benchwork, which is the base, and there is some angled timber legs that go down to the wall as well. And on top of that is the actual layout modules themselves. So they're just made out of, pine framing, because I always thought down the track that I would, there would be maybe the possibility of moving or having to move it someday. So it's built in modular sections that it could easily be put into a vehicle to transport. So, and where I've got where they join together, I've just had the track cut in that location, and I've just put rail joiners that I can just slide in one direction so that there's no, damage to the track. And if I have to replace it, all I have to do is marry that up again and slide the rail joiner back.
When it comes to scenery, are you one of those finish one scene completely guys, or do you work across the layout and just kind of go back and forth as your mood takes you?
So for me, I wanted to kind of get the scene right from the start. So I guess I'd be in the latter category. So I'd basically come in and just do all the layers of scenery. I wasn't just happy with one layer of ground foam, for example. I'd use static grass matting sheets, different types of clump foliage. I think it's Martin Welberg I used quite a bit. I'd make my own trees out of, I think they're like a Scenic Express type of tree you have there in North America, kind of like a very fine leafed foliage. We get them here in a box. I think Nock is the manufacturer. And you have to do a bit of work to get them straight and take off all the small bits of leaves and stuff. And then what I do is I'd spray paint them like a dark brown color. Then I would just use a rattle can adhesive spray and just sprinkle on different ground foams and that type of thing. And I made a couple of pine trees using the same technique, but instead of dusting on foliage, I get my static grass gun out and attach it to the tree and use some, dark green grass fibers to make pine trees. So that was a cool thing to do.
On this episode, we were able to talk about all the amazing things that can be done in a small space. For the person listening to this podcast right now who only has a small spare bedroom to build their layout in, what advice would you give to them?
Well, I'd basically say that, you've got to, if you want to do prototypical stuff, you choose an era and the locomotives and rolling stock you want to use. And, you've got to build something for you and what appeals to you. So you've got to work out a track plan. For me, it was one that went around the walls. So it is a shelf layout. It's one that can be taken apart if I need to and not destroyed. And then, you develop your scenery techniques. But I would just say, it's really good to start practicing if you're not building a layout on some scenery stuff, just to get a handle on it, because, when you come to building the layout, that's already in your belt how to do that. And so you can just start doing it.
When I left your layout, I did say to you that this was a very inspirational layout. I still believe that to be the case. It's an amazing layout for proving that big trains can be run in small spaces, and the ability to have a small layout where you can get to super detailing and really bring a scene to life is exactly what you have done. Again, folks, go see that live stream video. Get the visual from this, aroundthelayout.com/237. We'll share the links to that. Plus, we'll share some of the photos that were taken during that visit as well. Cameron, you're not a lone wolf anymore. You are immersed in model railroading in New South Wales now, and I know for the last few months have been quite a whirlwind for you. Talk about stepping out now and meeting this amazing crowd that you've met between Justin and the Surf Line and the Sydney RPM. Tell us where that's taken you.
It's just been amazing last couple of months, to be honest. So when I saw the RPM and I sent an email to apply for it, and then I got a phone call and it was Justin, and we had this really good conversation, and I sent him some photos of my layout, and he goes, you're definitely, the kind of people we're looking for to come. So from then it was like, I met you, Ray, and we did a Thursday night chat, and meeting all the guys in that group as well. It's been really cool. And Paul. So it's just been amazing. And the RPM was just, the icing on the cake. So I'm looking forward to future events for that, for sure.
I can tell you that model railroading has introduced me to some of the greatest people I've ever met. You are one of them. I certainly am so proud to be able to call you a friend, and the opportunity we had to spend together in New South Wales. I'm appreciative of that. And of course, being able to see your layout and experience that as well. Cameron, so glad you came on Around the Layout podcast and shared your story.
No, it's been a pleasure, Ray. Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.